We'll call to order the regular adjourned meeting of the Winnebago County Board for Thursday, September 8th, 2016. Agenda changes under Finance. Please remove items E through S. Clerk will call the roll.
Westcott? Wilson? Biondo? Boomer? Badusha? Gurl? Goro? Guevara? Hoffman? Jury? Kelly? Lyon? McDonald? Nicolosi? Red? Salgado? Schultz? Sweeney? Tassoni? Webster? 18 present, 2 absent.
We do have a quorum. Invocation and Pledge of Allegiance, Board Member David Boomer. All please stand.
Lord, help us remember those who elected us during our budget crisis and give us the wisdom to understand wants versus needs. Watch over our first responders, protect those who protect our freedoms, and through your guidance and direction, the future will be bright. Amen.
I have one proclamation this evening. I'd like to call on Mrs. Alice Upchurch, and she is accepting this in U.S. Constitution Week on behalf of the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution. And this is regarding U.S. Constitution Week. Whereas in the summer of 1787, delegates convened in Philadelphia to create a more perfect union and craft a document that is the foundation of our country. With great diligence, they worked to develop a framework that would balance authority and inherent freedoms, federal interests, state powers, individual rights, and national unity. On September 17th of the same year, the delegates signed the Constitution of the United States. And whereas today every American shares in this legacy of liberty, and we are grateful for the courage, conviction, and sacrifice of all those who have helped preserve and uphold the principles of a free society. As we remember the enduring importance of the Constitution, we also recognize our responsibility as citizens to respect and defend the values of our founding fathers and participate in the unfolding story of freedom. And whereas in celebration of the signing of the Constitution and in recognition of the Americans who strive to uphold the duties and responsibilities of citizenship, the Congress, by joint resolution, February 29, 1952, designated September 17th as Constitution Day and Citizenship Day. And whereas each year the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution celebrate and commemorate U.S. Constitution Week from September 17th through September 23rd, now, therefore, I, Scott Christensen, Chairman of the County Board, do hereby proclaim the days of September 17th through 23rd, 2016, to be U.S. Constitution Week in Winnebago County, and I urge all citizens to reflect on the privilege of being an American with all the rights, responsibilities which that privilege involves. Congratulations, Alice.
Constitution Week is the commemoration of America's most important document. It is celebrated annually. The United States Constitution stands as a testament to the tenacity of Americans throughout history to maintain their liberties, freedom, and inalienable rights. This celebration of Constitution Week was started by the Daughters of the American Revolution. The DAR petitioned Congress to set aside September 17th through the 23rd as Constitution Week. The resolution was later adopted and signed into law on August 2nd, 1956, by Dwight D. Eisenhower. On a side note, Mamie Dowd Eisenhower happened to be a member of the Gettysburg DAR chapter, and I kind of wonder, did she have something to say to Ike to make sure this happened? We can only guess. I want to thank Mr. Chairman, for all of the years of your service to helping our DAR and recognizing all that we do in this community. And also the County Board for your continued support of our Rockford chapter. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Alice.
You're welcome.
May I please have a motion to approve the minutes from the August 11, 2016 meeting and lay over the minutes from the August 25, 2016 meeting? Mr. Guevara moves. Mr. Jury, Mr. Nicolosi, Mr. Gurl seconds. Additions, corrections, deletions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. Announcements, communications, Clerk Mullins,
The items listed below were received as correspondence.
and they'll be placed on file. Any other announcements or communications? Couple items. Next Wednesday at 6 p.m. will be our annual special board meeting, county board meeting, where we'll take up the budget in more detail. I've also got Mark Good from Venture One. You might recall that's the Rock 39 developer who will be here for a report. And I've also got Mr. Del Sano and Mr. Deary invited to be here regarding the airport authority and a report on that issue as well. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda by Mr. Guevara, second by Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Jury, Mr. Boomer, Mr. Webster. Any additions, corrections, deletions? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Consent agenda is unanimously approved. Standing committee reports, Mr. Biondo. Because you've got so much that's been removed, we'll let you go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee's report, I'd like to read in budget amendments 2016-043 through 2016-046 to be laid over.
Okay, they're ready in for a first reading.
All right, and I would like to move to suspend the rules. The votes were 8-0 on 3 of them and 7-1 on the other.
So you're moving to suspend the rules on all of those?
Yes.
Heard the motion, second by Mr. Sweeney and Mr. Gurl. Any objections to suspending the rules? Hearing none, the clerk will cast the yes vote. For all members present, rules are suspended and a motion is in order. Mr. Biondo.
All right, I'd like to move to separate item 2016-044, and I so move.
Okay. Heard the motion, seconded by Mr. Schultz and Mr. Jury and Mr. Gurl. All in favor of separating 044, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 044 will be taken separately. So motion, Mr.
All right.
Biondo.
Thank you. I'd like to move to approve items 2016-043, 2016-045, and 2016-046.
Heard the motion, seconded by Mr. Jury and Mr. Gurl. Discussion. Any objections to the motion? Hearing none, the clerk will cast a yes vote for all members present. Items 043, 045, 046 are approved.
All right, thank you. I would also now like to move to approve item 2016-044.
Heard the motion, seconded by Mr. McDonald, Mr. Jury, Mr. Sweeney, and Mr. Gurl. Discussion. Any objections to the motion? Clerk will call the roll.
Wilson? Biondo?
Yes.
Boomer? Padusha? Gurl. Yes. Gorel. Guevara. Yes. Hoffman. Jury. Yes. Kelly.
No.
Lyon. McDonald.
Yes.
Nicolosi.
Yes.
Red. Delgado.
Yes.
Schultz. Sweeney.
Yes.
Tassoni.
Yes.
Webster. Westcott.
Yes.
14 yes, 6 no.
Okay, the amendment is approved. Mr. Biondo?
Yes, that was the actual approval of the amendment, of the budget amendment.
Correct. So 4-4 is approved.
All right, then we'll go to item C, which is, I move to approve ordinance to amend ordinance 2012 CO-74 to authorize the use of the remaining proceeds of the bond series for, to change from Baxter Road at its intersection with Linderwood, certain improvements, roads south of Baxter Road, and certain related improvements.
Heard the motion. Seconded by Mr. Gurl, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Jury, and Mr. Kelly. Any discussion? Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, the clerk will cast a yes vote for all members present, and the amendment, or the ordinance, I should say, is approved. Mr. Biondo?
Yes, I move to approve ordinance authorizing and providing for the purchase of 2 Sheriff Department prisoner transport vehicles under the installment purchase contract. This is basically for the bid. We've already approved the purchase. It's just we now have a bidder, U.S. Bank Corp., that's doing it for 1.63%. And I
Heard the motion. Seconded by Mr. Jury, Mrs. Red, and Mr. Gurl. Discussion? Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, the clerk will cast a yes vote for all members present, and the ordinance is approved. Mr. Biondo.
Yes, I was wondering if at this point we were going to discuss the budget assumptions, or do you want?
Yeah, I think we can do that.
All right,
This is discussion.
because we have some updates on interest rates and how much we have to pay and things like that.
Everyone has a copy, I assume, your desk. So I guess I would draw your attention to this document that says 2017 budget assumptions.
Oh,
Yeah, you can see.
let's see, I was trying to figure out, okay, I have the other one. Yeah, actually, having, been removed here, we had $2.19 million for the budget reduction. That was what we were going to have left in our deficit. We were going to vote on adjust the property taxes. That was removed. We also the consolidation of the finance and the auditor's office was removed, and the freeze of compensation for non-bargaining personnel was removed. So what we have left then is that the net budget reduction required, assuming that the budget is approved next week with no changes, is now $2,488,643, and that would have a reduction impact on the departments of about 4%. And the new bond, there was in this longitudinal, or the portrait version, it shows that we had, in the original estimate, we were going to be paying $12.683 million for interest over 12 years, and, 16 years, and the 2016 revised estimate, now we got lower interest rates, so it's now dropped $3 million to 9.612, and that is a reduction of $3,071,000, a 24% reduction in the actual cost of the bonds, and it actually not only generates the $3 million we had before, but $3,371,000. So over the 16 years, there will be almost $54 million generated for public safety. So the ones that we have left, this $3,371,000, that's the shows in this one over here, and that's 5.39%. So if we didn't approve that, that means that you would add the 5.39 to the 3.99, and you would be somewhere over 9.5% cuts, and that'd be 1 out of 10 people would be let go. The other one is utilizing a fund balance of $1 million from the 1% public safety sales tax. It has a $15.6 million balance in it right now, and if we approve the 3.37, then we'll only be paying $5.2 million back instead of $8.5 million each year. And the last one is other specific reduction revenue enhancements. Now, those I'm not sure what they are exactly, but Mr. Chapman had those this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did go back and look at some of the areas that could possibly enhance revenues or specifically reduce expenses, and there were 3 areas that we looked at. The original estimate we made on the jail phone revenue, we increased that. We're looking at reducing the jury commission jurors expense, because the number that we used this last year was just kind of a guess, because at that time we didn't know what the impact would be of the increased rates in that. So we had put almost $400,000 in that line item, and right now we're spending at about between $300 and $350. So that's about $50,000, and then we're also looking at possibly moving some levy money from the nursing home, about $100,000, to the general fund, and that's related to the early retirements that we're going to have out at the nursing home. So that makes up the 300.
Okay, and the balances, a lot of people don't want to go into balances, and I guess I was thinking about it since about 5 o'clock this morning, to be exact. But the 1 million, we do have 15 there, and 5.5 would, or 5.2 would be what we'd have to pay out of this year's budget to pay the debt if we approve the 3.37 million. And I just looked at it like, if we would actually let go 1.7 million people, then, that's training, all kinds of other things we have to worry about. So we're going to try it for 1 year. If at the end of that year, the 2 balances, it doesn't help us, and we're going to, then just have to reverse that. But we're going to try it for a year so that we don't lose trained people. If it doesn't work out, then we'll have to eliminate it next time. So that's kind of where we're at, and I don't know, did you want to ask if we're not voting on this, because, it's going to be, this is what's going forward, and all the blue books we get next week, with all the levies that are there, is going to be based on this, all these figures right here, on these assumptions. And if there's...
Okay. Yeah, just to follow through, if I could, Ted, on the fund balances, particularly 1 cent, 15.6, 5.2 brings that to 10.6, and we'll need probably about 6 to have 3 months cash flow in there. So that would still leave an ample amount, 4.6 million as a balance, using 1 of that here and 1 from our existing budget. So you would still have conceivably above and beyond the 3 months reserve and the debt service, you would still have $2.5 million as a reserve, which is, I think, a very comfortable position. I think our bond counsel would agree. Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Chairman Christensen. Just a quick comment would be that, it's not the prettiest thing anyone's ever seen, but I'm certainly going to vote for it. It's something that, at the end of the day, we're not asking for more in taxes, and, no one likes the interest costs or whatnot, but I definitely don't think we can afford to sustain the types of cuts into the public safety personnel if we were to actually implement a $7.5 million budget reduction. So, we're still trying to, I guess, do the right thing here by capitalizing on the gains that we made in some of those departments, and without going to the taxpayers for more of their money. So thank you for taking that out of there in this revised presentation to us. I do have a cash flow question, just kind of out of curiosity here, so I understand. When is the payment on the Justice Center for this year supposed to have been due?
Generally, it's a spring, Mr. Chapman, isn't it?
Well, we actually make two payments, one in June for interest, and then normally the one in December is principal and interest. That's the big payment.
So if we were to do the vote to refinance, which I'm assuming would be in October, that would put an actual closing on those bonds. What I'm getting at, is there a one-time extra, positive cash flow situation with that, or no?
No, this would really impact the payment that you would make in 2017, but we always have to set that aside in essence a year ahead. So the actual payment would be made in 17. So no, there's no additional.
Okay, I know what the year-over-year cash flow difference is. I was just wondering if there was a one-time extra. So that's it, thanks.
And just to follow up on that, I think we'd be at just about 20.6 million accumulative on the PTEL funds we've foregone in the last 5 years. And the county, to your credit and other folks, led the way in that charge here locally, and realizing the property tax issue was so significant. Mr. Jury?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Mr. Sweeney. However, Ted, am I hearing this right when you said that if we refinance those bonds, we're going to get some 54 million back?
No, what actually happens is we basically move 54 million to public safety expenditures, where right now, for 9 years, we would get none. We're going to pay all of it for the bonds, and when we refinance the bonds, then it drops down to 5.2 million, and that 3.3 million times 16 years is what we now will put in there. And eventually, they'll cross in some place. We'll wind up paying 6 to 9 million more doing it this way, but we get money today.
And I think that's the way to go. I mean, we're not raising property tax, and I think that's a good way to go myself. I mean, in my lifetime, I've had to refinance my house. It's kind of a painless way to do it, but you have to do it. It's no extra cost to the taxpayer, and it's fighting an issue that they all know is very, very, very serious. So I'm going to support that. Thank you.
My conclusion, looking at all of this, was that we haven't raised the public safety sales tax since its inception in 2002. It's still 1%. We have not raised the property taxes in 6 years. It's been over just at 39 million for 6 years, and it's saved, $20 million and a half dollars by this year. With this debt restructure and with the remaining assumptions and levies, that statement is still true. We're not raising taxes. We're not raising it's still 1% sales tax, and we have continued to add to 20.5 million that we saved in PTEL, as the chairman said, and with this debt restructure, the county will still have saved over 50 million in interest that has been spent on the public safety, because at the beginning, we saved 8 million when we built the building, then we refinanced with, we paid down the debt from 147, 38 million, got it down to 109. We owe 171 instead of 231. So we saved, those $60 million have been spent and will be spent during the term of these debts for our public safety. And it would not have been spent had we not paid the debt down.
Right. Well, Ted, I'm standing with you, and I'm going to say this because I think we're going to stand with the people of Winnebago County, and I think by doing this, we'll improve this county. It'll save lives, and it will get crime, I think, where it needs to be, and we all know we're going nowhere the way it is. Thank you.
Mrs. Goro?
One of the things I want to ask Steve, when you're saying you're going to be using funds from River Bluff, would you explain that to me, please?
Mr. Chapman?
Yes, I believe in looking at the calculations of the early retirement for the nursing home, I believe, let me see here. I got the number. I think we're looking at an overall savings about $300,000. Obviously, that would be if none of the positions were filled for 6 months. That's probably not going to be realistic out there, but there are some certain positions that are not going to be filled in the future, and that's what I'm basing the $100,000 on.
Is any of this coming out of the reserves of River Bluff?
No, because you'd have reduced expenses.
And like you also said, that that is a place where when people go and you have to wait 6 months, that's going to be a real problem out there at River Bluff, because some of the people that might be going need to be replaced immediately.
Understand?
And so how's that going to be affected?
Well, that's going to have to be, we have a process in place in terms of going through that position review committee and so on. So I don't know when the individuals are actually retiring, or, so it's hard to say in terms of the impact, but there is a process in place.
Okay. The second part, we're in a real economic downswing. We have been for 10 years now. And part of that cause was because of people refinancing. It doesn't get better. In the end, you end up going bankrupt. And since we don't want to go bankrupt, I know you don't see it, but I see it every day. When I walk through foreclosed homes, foreclosed businesses, I see it all the time. I don't want us to end up in that type of a position where we keep stretching out that amount, because that building already, how old is it? And do we have a capital improvement set aside for that building? Because in the next few years, you're going to have to start replacing things. And I want to make sure that we have reserves and funds to go back when we have to put in a new air conditioner. And those aren't cheap things for that building. No. And I wanted to make sure that we have funds available, or are we going to go back to the taxpayer that we're trying to save money, are we? And asking them for another 1% so we can get the building fixed. We saw what happened across the street because of the fact they never updated that building, they never took care of it. Are we going to be in that same predicament 15 years from now?
I don't know.
All I can say is the track record says no.
Really?
You know, that one set, no, clearly you've identified, Mrs. Gorham, I know you're on the front line in your business, and we got to hope for a little positive future.
Well,
No question about that. We got to get our sales tax back to where it was. We saw the first uptick, at least we've now stopped the bleeding on property tax values. That's huge that it up, even that 1.25% is a good sign, so, you know, and it's not, I'm not going to sit here and say it's all roses, but I can assure you, I will not be promoting a 1 cent.
Well, neither will I, but I don't want to leave my future with saying, you realize back there in 2016, they put us in a hole. The worst always travels with you, no matter how good you are and all the good you do. They don't remember that. They remember how we put them in a hole.
And I think you're right, and you'll recall that we are really watching those fund balances, so.
I sure hope so.
Minimums, yes.
All right, thank you.
This time, the tax rate is actually going to, for the first time in 6 years, actually go down. And because we had 1.25% EAV increase, so we're actually going to see what tax cap does when it goes the right way instead of the wrong way.
Mr. Webster?
Thank you, Chairman. In the years that I've been on the board, I don't recall a more difficult budget process than this one that's in front of us now, and I'm glad that we have Ted here. I appreciate the work that he does, and the patience that he has working through this. I see that the newspaper there, Mr. Sweeney, gave you some accolades today, and they're very well deserved. Kudos to you, Ted.
Thank you.
But I'm very happy to see that we're not going to pursue raising any taxes. These property taxes, as we all know, we pay some of the highest in the entire state in this area. And we're hurting more than most areas of the state. So to me, that made no sense at all to raise any sort of tax, no matter how small it was, because it would have been a very minuscule raise. but people here are saddled with these exorbitant property taxes we have here. And to raise it even one tiny little bit is just going to put one huge burr underneath that saddle again. And so I'm very happy to see that we're not going to go down that road, because there was no way in the world I would ever support something like that. Thank you.
Mr. Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm obviously pleased that the interest cost on extending the bonds is declining because of saving interest rate. It was something I asked that we consider at the last finance meeting, is that we look at the interest rates we could get today.
And they did.
But, you know, you already know what I'm going to say. I'd rather apply that to paying off the bonds early versus, or pick at least an intermediate term instead of extending this out as far as we are. And it's still $9 million I don't agree with. The early retirement savings is not reflected here. It could be, but it's going to be given back to the department heads to help solve this $2,488,000 if what we were told at the finance meeting 2 nights ago is still true. And I believe it should be broken out as a separate item that wouldn't just be handed back to the department heads. The whole idea of early retirement savings was to net us a savings, not to hand that right back to the department heads. And the spending of fund balances is something that I don't agree with, and I've stated that repeatedly. Thank you.
Mr. Jerry?
Thank you. I agree with all our colleagues here, but, and Angie, you know, I agree with you, what you said, but if we don't get crime under control, we're not going to have to worry about anything. Thank you.
Well, this actually goes to, I mean, this, right now, I did the calculations on that, too. You know, the sheriff's department does not get the entire $3.37 million. He gets about 55%, and which is $1.9 million, and the rest will go to alternative programs, justice centers, et cetera, et cetera. So it was what other people wanted, too. They didn't want it all going there, so, I mean, I think the sheriff is willing to accept what he gets, and so that's a compromise. This whole thing is a compromise to me, but that's the way you do things, get it solved. And the engineer in me wants to get it solved.
Mr. Kelly?
At caucus yesterday, the numbers that we received included a line item, freeze the compensation of non-bargaining personnel for a savings of $375,080.
Right.
And I don't see that on the current proposal.
That's one of the three that was taken, the $375,000, the $470,000, and the, what was the other one? There was 3 of them. The consolidation. Those were all taken out. I'm not sure the 375, for the compensation for non-bargaining personnel, what was the, I mean, I just think there was a lot of people didn't want to do that. Is that the reason, or what?
Well, yeah, I think that was the reason, because we have folks that have implemented so many of these cuts to the tune of $26 million over the last several years, and we didn't feel that it was fair to freeze them and just honor the bargaining units.
So that 375 is there. It's moved up to the top line, which is the $2,488,000. So that means they're still going to be.
Oh, okay.
So the cuts are almost 4% now instead of 3.5%.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
And the reason it's got to go against the various department budgets, just like the early retirement, if there's vacation pay, et cetera, is charged against that budget, because you conceivably could have a department with no retirements and one with 2. So you can't say, well, we're all going to then share in a cut after this department has to get by for 6 months with 2 less people, et cetera. So that part makes perfect sense.
And if the early retirement is in there too, it's in there because what will happen is, even if it goes back to the departments that lose the people, they aren't going to hire other people. It's going to reduce the deficit. That's what it's going back there for. It's, it's going to reduce their cost, I guess, and then they can't hire anybody for 6 months.
That's right.
And that's what it's going to be, so.
Further discussion? Okay. I guess we would just, there's no official action tonight, but
No, there isn't.
I would like to just entertain just a straw vote or maybe a show of hands of those who, the reason I ask is because to convert this into the levies we need to by next Wednesday is going to be a very difficult challenge for staff. So I guess I'd like just maybe a show of hands for those of you that think this makes sense, what we handed out tonight. If it's something you think you could support, just please raise your right hand. Give us some idea of a straw vote. Okay. I'm just saying, if you can think you can favor this assumptions, just please raise your right hand so we have some idea. If we can't, we almost need to know now. Okay. Okay. That gives us a good idea. All right, very good. DeBiondo.
Yeah, because we basically have to have the blue sheets and the budget and all that figured out by next Wednesday when we vote. And that's the end of our report.
Thank you. Zoning Committee, Mr. Webster?
Thank you, Chairman. Your zoning committee tonight has 4 items that were in for layover to be voted on. These are all sort of tied at the hip, you might say. They're by the same applicant, same piece of property. These are all variances, VO 316, VO 416, VO 516, and VO 616. All 4 of these come with conditions. And they were approved by Zoning Board of Appeals, all 4 were, and all 4 were approved unanimously by the Zoning Committee as well. And I would move to approve.
You moving to approve all 4, Mr. Webster?
Yes, sir, all 4 at one time with conditions.
With conditions. Seconded by Mr. Guevara, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Kelly, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Salgado. Any discussion regarding 1 through 4? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? The variances are all approved. Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. That's all we have in the way of zoning, except to announce that Wednesday, September 14th is Zoning Board of Appeals meeting, and then we follow up on Wednesday, September 28th with our meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Economic Development, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman. Before you, we have a resolution granting authority to the Winnebago County Board Chairman to execute the documents necessary to complete a $60,000 revolving loan fund to Jericho DBA Sacred Places and more. There was an error on your that said Scared Places, so you can ignore that. And I so move.
Seconded by Mr. Guevara, Mr. Drury, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Tassoni, and Mrs. Gorel. Mrs. Red. Any discussion on the Sacred Places and more? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? The loan is approved.
Thank you, Chairman. That completes our report.
Thank you. Operations and Administrative, Mr. Drury.
No report.
Thank you. And with Public Works, Mr. Kelly.
Public Works has 2 resolutions. The first is for the additional appropriation of motor fuel tax funds for intersection improvements on Bell School Road from Argus Drive to Lucky Lane, and I'll move its adoption.
Heard the motion, seconded by Mr. Girl, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Nicolosi, Mr. Guevara, and Mrs. Gorel. Good, everyone? Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution's approved. Mr. Kelly.
And the second resolution is for the appropriation of motor fuel tax funds for a Phase 1 engineering study for the improvement of Riverside Boulevard between Material Avenue and Sage Drive. And I move its adoption.
Move the motion, again, second by Mr. Tassone, Mr. Gurl, Mr. Webster, Mr. Guevara. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution is approved.
That concludes our report.
Thank you, thank you. I'm so glad we're moving on that final engineering. That's our worst intersection. Public Safety Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Public Safety Committee brings in two resolutions tonight. The first resolution is authorizing an execution of an intergovernmental cooperation for the police services for the village of New Milford, and I so move.
Heard the motion, seconded by Mr. Jury, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Guevara, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Gurl, Mrs. Red. Discussion? All those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Schultz.
The thing that jumped out at me, if I just get clarification, is the dollar amount related to the service seems too small to me intuitively, but that could be wrong.
Mr. Chapman, I mean, it's pretty much the way it's always been, I guess.
I think the amount is, we were receiving, I think, $6,600 a year, and now I think that's doubled in this particular agreement. I guess in terms of the rate, that's a question I guess you'd have to talk to the Sheriff's Department about, but we are actually doubling the amount that we're receiving from previous years. Yeah, that too, but I guess in terms of the rate, I can't answer that question.
Could I speak to that for a second, Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman?
Mr. Fiducia.
Actually, the Sheriff's Department has to provide the village of New Milford police protection, but what the village has done in the past is they were paying the county a set amount of dollars for the protection they were getting. And the village was so pleased with the Sheriff's Department's services to the village that they voluntarily asked for that. They voluntarily agreed to this amount of money, so they're basically just upping the amount to the county because they were appreciative of what the sheriff has done down there. That was my understanding from the last meeting. I don't know if that answered your question or not. Yeah, I understand that, but they want to give the sheriff extra money for their patrol because they thought they were getting the bang for the buck out of it.
No problem. A couple $100,000 in host fees might have a little something to do with their willingness to. That's certainly.
I'm not going to argue that point either.
That's something I think that maybe your committee, talking with the sheriff, would take up for future contracts. And what kind of service they really require. Anything else, Mr. Fiducia?
We need to move that.
We need a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Resolution is approved. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you. Next, I have a resolution for the county board to authorize bids for two juvenile probation vehicles. The award was given to Anderson, Rock River Ford. The bidding process even looked at used vehicles, and the used vehicles that were brought in, we found new vehicles for a lower price. I so move.
Heard the motion. Second by Mr. Westcott. Mr. Wilson. Discussion? Mrs. Webb? Second? Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? The resolution is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes our report.
You unfinished business, Mr. Westcott?
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted an update on the corner of Rivers Lane, Forest Hills, and Pepper Drive. Mr. Vanderwert and Mr. Kelly, it is looking just beautiful. It's bright, it's been striped today, and should be opening up for flashing lights real soon. Thank you again for all your work.
Including a flashing yellow arrow.
Yes.
The first in the county, I think, yes. Mrs. Goro?
Thank you, Chairman. Let's not forget Sunday morning. Do you want to?
Oh, yes, please remind us, if you so.
I'm reminding all of you that on Sunday morning at 8:30, we should all be on the corner of Horseman and West State Street for our grand opening of our 9/11 monuments there. That's so important. And, Kilburn and West State. So I hope to see all of you there that morning. And I also want to thank you, should have done it under announcements, but last Sunday, out by our stadium, thanks to the county for what you have done to encourage and to host the Women's Baseball League. Yeah, that was fantastic. That was a really good showing, and it's something that will last for a long time, encouraging more women to get into baseball like they did back in the 40s. Thank you very much.
Very good, and yes, it's 8 o'clock, there's a light breakfast served Sunday morning. We'd like to certainly have as many board members as possible there at the 911. I did get a peek of the bronze statues before they covered and went up, and they're phenomenal. They're really, really something, so appropriate that we honor that date, and it's also appropriate that all people stand in reverence, including professional football players. New business? Entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mr. Wilson, second by Mr. Guerrero. And Mr. Guerrero, all those in favor signify by saying aye.